Okay. So welcome everyone to this celebration of the 25th anniversary of the publication of the Last Dinosaur Book by Tom Mitchell. Thank you very much for joining us online from very different time zones. I really appreciate that. My name is Victor Manin, and I'll be your host for this event. I want first to give very quickly a few words of thanks, and then briefly explain how we are going to proceed before leaving the floor to our guest speakers for today. So first and foremost, I want to thank very much, obviously, Professor Tom Mitchell for being with us today. Tom is without a doubt known to everyone attending this event. Donnelley Distinguished Professor of English and Art History at the University of Chicago. He is known mostly for his groundbreaking and field-defining works in iconology and the study of visual cultures. And the Last Dinosaur Book occupies the most singular place in that body of work. When I reached out to Tom, I honestly did not know what to expect. I was a little bit frightened. But the very same day, Tom answered me and welcomed the idea with enthusiasm. And for his trust and support in organizing this little celebration, I'm most grateful. Thank you very much to Chris Manias for accepting to host this event on Pop Paleo. Without his support, without the platform and the community that he's been building over the years of paleo enthusiasts, scholars, and scientists, this event will not be happening today. And finally, thank you to our four speakers for having accepted my invitation to share their thoughts on the Last Dinosaur Book and the study of dinosaurs in the past 25 years. So thank you to Allison Lawrence, Zoe Laccas, Norman MacLeod, and Will Tattersdill. And one last word, and then I promise we'll stop. One last word regarding the organization of this session. The session will run for about 90 minutes or so. Each speaker will have about 10 to 12 minutes to present some of their thoughts. After that, Tom will be given time to discuss and address what the comments of our speakers. And hopefully we'll have some remaining time for comments and questions from the audience. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our very first speaker, Allison Lawrence. Allison is a cultural and environmental historian of the modern United States. She earned a PhD from an interdisciplinary history and science program at MIT in 2019, and currently teaches required liberal education courses at Stanford University. Recently, Allison has written about coyotes, cougars, companion animals, young Earth creationist dinosaurs, as well as the diverse creatures that have lived and died at the La Brea Tar Pits in Los Angeles. So please join me in welcoming Allison.
Thank you so much, Victor. Thank you for humoring the consonants that I forced you to speak out just now. It's lovely to be here. I wanted to use my time to reflect a bit on the book itself, the book in question, and then to bring in some examples that I've come across in my own research that I think illuminate some of what Mitchell does in the book. I'll keep this formal while I'm presenting. I'll use Mitchell now, and maybe we'll move on to Tom later. But let me share my screen. Okay, there we go. So I want to begin at the end with the best part of any book, the acknowledgments section. In the Last Dinosaur Book, Mitchell calls attention to the ambivalent responses he received from the sometimes anonymous scientists who read his manuscript. Here's a taste of the feedback. I do not agree with a lot of what he says. Provocative. Will upset his potential readership. And my favorite, perhaps a hoax. In some ways, we are still living in this cultural moment where critical humanistic study is met with skepticism, scorn, censure, or worse. But there's also enthusiasm there too. There's that kernel. People couldn't put the book down. And I think, Mitchell and others have weathered the landscape enough so that the fossiliferous scholarship that emerges these days is well enough received. At least no one has told me to my face that my work resembles a hoax. And I think a lot of that is due to the groundwork that Mitchell laid. I do have to say, though, that one woman did approach me after a talk to share some disappointment. This was at an American Historical Association meeting about 5, maybe 7 years ago now. I'd mentioned that this unclassified diplodocid that you can see on your screen right now at the American Museum of Natural History is a compound creature crafted of different specimens and different genera, even. And she told me that I'd ruined her childhood. She said this in jest, but she was sincere too, I could tell. In any case, I want to thank Mitchell, who was warned that scientists would be, quote, annoyed by this book, for charging ahead anyway and carving a use path for those of us who followed. And in the spirit of acknowledgements, I also want to thank Victor for organizing this event and Chris for creating this interdisciplinary community that really does bridge the two cultures divide. Now, what's always struck me about the Last Dinosaur Book is how Mitchell positions himself. He didn't go through a dinosaur phase as a child. The popular fascination with this collection of creatures was not self-evident to him. He wasn't interested in dinosaurs themselves, but rather in other people's interest in dinosaurs. He sought out the factors, psychological, social, material, economic, ideological, that led to this imaginary and brilliantly exaggerated bedroom you see here, created by contemporary artist Mark Dion in the mid-90s. In my opinion, it's this labor-intensive curiosity and this desire to understand fellow humans that is the enduring strength of The Last Dinosaur Book. It's a standpoint I try to adopt and one I nudge my students to embrace in their own research. Though 25 years on, I'm not sure anyone in the Western world could take on quite the same perspective that Mitchell once did. He was a self-avowed outsider to dinomania. I'm not. I was born in 1989, which means that technically I arrived on Earth before Jurassic Park, but I have no memory of that life. For me, Hammond's prehistoric playground has always existed. Dinosaur merchandise has always been there. I can't imagine consumer culture without dinosaurs. Now, my childhood bedroom did not look like this, but I did have some of these products. And it was just slightly more diversified, right? So my dinosaur plushies kept company with Beanie Babies and Spice Girls merch. What I'm suggesting is that I could never achieve the same critical distance in my own work that Mitchell does. Perhaps others in this room feel similarly. And what I'm wondering, perhaps we can take it up in discussion, is what this means for our scholarship. To see the dinosaur not as something strange, but as a literal bedfellow, a companion for all of living memory. Now, instead of trying to answer my own question, I'm going to redirect. We're going to go into the archives. I'd like to invite you to join me in California on a visit to the La Brea Tar Pits in Los Angeles. Now, the tar pits bubble up a couple of times in the Last Dinosaur Book to demonstrate how dinosaurs have not only taken over our modern moment, but also annexed other epochs that aren't their own. In my archival research at the LA Natural History Museum and at the Tar Pits, which are the same parent institution, but two different museums, I've seen examples of how dinosaurs creep in, right? And I'd like to share some of those examples with you. But I'll give you a quick lay of the land first. The anaerobic asphalt seeps of La Brea have been preserving the remains of unlucky animals since the late Pleistocene. They yield one of the most extensive collections of Ice Age flora and fauna on the planet and function as a crucial indicator of environmental change. There are no dinosaurs at La Brea. Southern California was underwater until quite recently in deep time terms, and dinosaurs were long extinct by the time the asphalt began building its ecological archive around 50,000 years ago. La Brea is located in what is now a bustling commercial district of Los Angeles. The park, where the tar pits still bubble, is free and open to the public. You can see that map right there. When Los Angeles County accepted the land in 1924, it agreed to maintain the park as a public space in perpetuity. Visitors can stroll the grounds, watch the methane bubbles burst in the open seeps, and wonder at the life-size models of extinct Ice Age megafauna. If visitors want to visit the dedicated Tar Pits Museum, which opened in 1977, that costs money. In theory, the museum is exclusively dedicated to displaying the Pleistocene creatures unearthed at La Brea. But theory only gets us so far, right? The dinosaur is so commanding a cultural artifact that the general public expects it to be even where it is geologically absent. Many visitors come to La Brea expecting to see dinosaurs. And if we are to trust TripAdvisor reviews, many visitors leave thinking that they have indeed seen dinosaurs there. For instance, a favorable review from 2017. Worth a visit. I mean, dinosaurs in the middle of LA? It's a great place to get educated on dinos. Other reviews echo the sentiment. How amazing to walk around a museum and park full of dinosaur bones and mystery. Hard to imagine a site like this in the center of a big city. Archaeological exhibits well worth seeing. The reviews speak to how the historical sciences tend to collapse, right, in popular conceptions. Even visitors who understand Mesozoic monsters and Pleistocene mammals to be distinct participate in this conflation. Consider this 5-star review. Quote, not a T-Rex or Triceratops to be found. This is a museum full of more recent dinosaurs. The tourist goes on to specify that by more recent dinosaurs, he means mastodons, saber-toothed cats, giant sloths, and the like. Such a capacious definition of dinosaur points to popular misconception that has persisted since the deep time revolution of the 19th century. Audiences that encounter these exhibits tend to regard the planetary past as a single undifferentiated world separate from our own. So even visitors who enjoyed their visit to La Brea, engaged with interpretive materials, took a guided tour, can depart with the same enthusiastically erroneous ideas they brought with them. The Last Dinosaur Book helps us understand how the idea of the dinosaur has taken such hold. The misunderstandings that bubble up in reviews of La Brea make clear that despite carefully curated encounters and valiant efforts to educate, museums cannot dismantle popular misconceptions or curb eager imaginations entirely. And the museum itself plays into dinomania. Move the slides for you, give you a new view. Over the decades, the museum has entertained the idea of bringing dinosaurs into the space to increase visitation. Before the current museum opened in 1977, when the county was still attempting to acquire property for its Ice Age museum, the higher-up museum leadership seriously considered relocating all of the dinosaurs from the Natural History Museum across town to the tar pits. In the 1960s, floor plans were drawn up for a La Brea museum that never came to be. The ground level of this imagined institution was to feature an exhibit called Titans of the Past, where extinct animals of the Cenozoic and the Mesozoic were displayed all together. Museum leaders admitted that this was, quote, not good stratigraphy, but they argued that public interest and practicality, things like ceiling height, dictated this arrangement. It made sense to put all the, quote, prehistoric monsters together in one place. As the museum president put it at the time, given the great public interest in dinosaurs, no natural history museum can be either great or truly effective without extensive displays of dinosaurs. This museum never came to be. The current institution, which opened in the 1970s, did not display dinosaur fossils from the start. But dinosaurs are not excluded entirely. Just spend some time in the gift shop. We get a glimpse of this in a 1988 film called Miracle Mile, which is a nuclear love story. It's a wild film, a bit of a cult classic, and I recommend it. But for our purposes, I'll just say that the film starts at and ends in the tar pits. For the first 5 minutes of the film, the camera takes us on a tour of the museum, which hasn't changed all that much in the intervening decades, though at this very moment it's undergoing a reimagination. We exit the museum naturally through the gift shop, and there we find dinosaurs galore. See if you can spot them next to Anthony Edwards. In 1989, a year after this film was released, the museum's gift shop manager explained to a reporter for The Times the tightrope that she tried to walk in supporting the institution's educational mission and meeting public interest. She said, "A couple years ago, a large percentage of our merchandise was dinosaur. We've been trying to winnow it down and put the emphasis on mammals." But then came Crichton and Spielberg and their impossible, irresistible theme park. In the wake of Jurassic Park, any natural history museum gift shop would be testing the goodwill of visitors by not having dinosaur merchandise available. And it still is today. Now that brings me to the summer blockbuster of 1993, by which, of course, I do not mean Jurassic Park. No, I'm referring to an Arnold Schwarzenegger action comedy called Last Action Hero, released just a week after Spielberg's Dinosaurs. It's a fantasy film where characters can cross the line between reality and silver screen, and it kind of was a box office bomb. It disappointed folks, but I also recommend this film. It's good fun. About halfway through the film, an action scene ends literally in the tar pits. There's a ticking time bomb that Arnold's character must deal with. La Brea proves the nearest, most cinematic solution. Here's an aerial shot. We're seeing Arnold's perspective here as he rides a swinging crane toward the asphalt seeps. But I'm sure you can spot the difference. This is not La Brea itself, but a purpose-built set that has swapped out the iconic mammoths of the lake pit for dinosaurs. After Arnold releases the bomb, which is dutifully swallowed by the asphalt that has claimed so many creatures over so many millennia, Arnold himself takes a dip. And here, as he climbs out of the pit, we get a glimpse of one of the dinosaurs behind him. Its teeth are bared, as so often they are, to emphasize its fearsome nature. But to me, this dinosaur seems to be laughing. It's in on the joke. It knows that it does not belong there. Looked at another way, though, we might say that the dinosaur is exactly where it belongs. The presence of dinosaurs at a Pleistocene fossil locality is intentional. The public might use the term dinosaur loosely, but it's no mistake when museums, merchandisers, and filmmakers use them. And that's where I'll conclude my thoughts with a final acknowledgement that the Last Dinosaur Book gives us the foundation and the tools for understanding how and why dinosaurs have escaped from their temporally appropriate fossil halls in museums and come to feature anachronistically and unavoidably in all of our lives. Mitchell wondered if his book was marking the close of a dinomania wave. I think that wave is still cresting. We couldn't avoid dinosaurs if we tried. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Allison, for this presentation. We are going to now move to our second speakers. And once again, after everyone's intervention, we'll have time for question and discussion with the author. So our second speaker is Zoe Laccas. Zoe is a writer and a researcher focused on intersections of art and science. Her articles and criticism have appeared, among other venues, in the New York Times and Art Forum. She's the author of Paleo Art: Visions of the Prehistoric Past, which is an absolute lore of artistic representations of deep time and a most important publication in the now expanding literature on paleo art. So please join me in welcoming Zoe. Zoe, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you so much for that introduction, Victor, and thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It's really such a treat to be able to celebrate a book that has been such a lodestar for all of us as we try to make sense of dinosaur images. So forgive my clumsy screen sharing technique, but hopefully you can now see that. Okay, great. So let's see. As Victor mentioned, my name is Zoe, and I wrote a book on the ways in which artists and scientists have depicted prehistoric animals since the 1830s, when the first images of extinct species based on fossil evidence emerged in England. And in that project, I argued that depictions of dinosaurs and other extinct primordial species that get lumped in with them, as Alison pointed out, they often say as much about the human cultures in which they were created as they do about deep time. So at the height of the Victorian period, for instance, dinosaurs frequently held a mirror to an expanding empire, reflecting its shining ideals of progress and well-ordered sovereignty. This watercolor of an iguanodon in command of a tropical kingdom is by the artist George Scharf and is the earliest surviving color image of a dinosaur. And to onlookers, its allegories of imperial rule over the colonies were quite clear. The poet and geologist George Fleming wrote, "The colossal iguanodon appears to reign undisputed monarch of the wild and wonderful scene, commanding some mighty Nile or still mightier Mississippi." During the Stalinist period of Soviet Russia, on the other hand, prehistoric animals became vehicles for artists to circumvent the mandates against painting anything ambiguous, decadent, or that might be perceived as bourgeois. Professional artists, as we all know, were subject to intense scrutiny and censorship. They were expected to produce propaganda celebrating utopian life in the Soviet Union. But paleo artists were not held to the same official standards. And so dinosaurs and other prehistoric species became a really potent, exciting means for scientific artists to explore, for instance, their interest in fauvism, as you can sort of pick out here, and just generally to produce images that do not have such a clear didactic purpose. These are all images, by the way, by Konstantin Florovich Florov, who was the director of the Orlov Paleontological Museum in Moscow. So while he was trained as a scientist, he was clearly reveling in contrasting colors and brushwork and other aspects of paleo art not explicitly related to their scientific function. And one of the driving questions behind that book was why paleo art, which is such a rich, intriguing genre, remains relatively obscure and understudied compared to some other better known forms of scientific illustration, such as medical illustration or anatomical illustration. I think more people on average are probably familiar with the work and names of Jean-James Audubon, the 19th century illustrator of birds, or Vesalius, the Renaissance anatomical illustrator, than they are with the giants of paleo art, Benjamin Waterhouse Hawkins, Charles Knight, Zdeněk Burian, even though these paleo artists have indelibly shaped the collective mental picture of the prehistoric world we all carry today. And ironically, I think the obscurity of paleo art is partly due to one of its greatest strengths. The sheer variety that make it such a compelling genre also make it quite visually disjointed and difficult to easily categorize. So the works I looked at in that book came in a vast variety of media. You have concrete sculptures like the famous Crystal Palace dinosaurs. You have oil paintings and murals like these paintings of mammoths by the French artist Mathurin Mehieu from the 1940s. And you have delicate works on paper, like this Archaeopteryx by Maurice Wilson from the 1960s. Paleo art comes in a vast variety of sizes. This piece, which is the first known work of paleo art in which the animals appear in a fully realized environment interacting with one another, is only about 12 inches wide. But then you also have murals like this one in the Orlov Paleontological Museum in Moscow, which is twice the size of a train car. And hopefully these snapshots at the bottom convey that sense of scale. Here are a few artists by the head of the T-Rex at left. And this is a snapshot from my researches. I'm sort of down there under the dinosaur neck, very small. And paleo art also, in addition to the vast range of media, also contains this enormous breadth of styles. So depending on the aesthetic predilections of the individual artists and institutions and the broader cultural trends and preferences of any given moment, we might see hints of romanticism or impressionism or fauvism or art nouveau, as we see in these in this Majolica tile mural at the bottom right, which is from Berlin. And in addition to this, you have the changing science. So John Martin's Country of the Iguanodon at left, an image from 1837, depicts an iguanodon and a megalosaurus. And at right, you see some more recent reconstructions of those same species. So without the context, knowing that the image at left is a depiction of dinosaurs, you might think it was an illustration of dragons or some other horrific mythical animals. And paleoart additionally has attracted such an eclectic cast of practitioners that the genre is further heterogeneous. Some paleoartists are scientists themselves. Others worked closely with scientists studying fossil evidence. Others were professional fine artists who happened to dabble in paleoart and do a few commissions. So you really have a very uneven landscape of approaches within this movement. And I think I was only able to engage with the dizzying, disorienting variety of paleoart and attempt some diagnosis about what these images reveal about their makers and their broader cultural moments because of the Last Dinosaur Book. A quick glance at my footnotes will reveal the extent of my debt to Dr. Mitchell. And as I reread the Last Dinosaur Book in anticipation of this event, I was amazed all over again by how many themes he wrangled into one piece of writing, from the economic symbolism of dinosaurs to the ways in which they reveal our anxieties over sex, gender, and reproduction. No one had ever taken such a fearless, extensive approach to this subject before, and no one has matched it since. Mitchell showed us that dinosaurs are both regal and ridiculous, that they are ferocious giants and vulnerable victims, that they are civic icons and also kitschy toys, that they're emblems of youth and of obsolescence, of prehistory and modernity, of pure science and shameless marketing. Dinosaurs are often lumped in with monsters and dragons, but they were also real everyday animals for millions of years, some of which survived and eventually became birds. We alternately describe dinosaurs as evolutionary success stories, animals that thrive for hundreds of millions of years, and also as embarrassing dead ends. They belong equally to the worlds of science and fantasy. And this mutability, as Dr. Mitchell demonstrated, may be their only definite quality. Since the Last Dinosaur Book was published, and certainly in the past few years, I've sensed that certain paleontologists, at least, and certain natural history museums are coming to place a greater emphasis on the fundamental unknowability of the dinosaur. Many of you are probably familiar with this book dedicated to the speculative aspects of paleoart, All Yesterdays, in which the authors, a paleozoologist, a paleoartist, and a science writer, show and explore how their counterparts from the distant future might reconstruct extant species if they had limited fossil evidence at their disposal. So here are a few pages from the book, and at left, they imagine these two swans without feathers and with these horrible scythe-like limbs, perfect for spearing tadpoles, which is surely what they must have used them for. And then a domestic house cat that is imagined as this sort of heavily armored killing machine. And for those of you who can't quite make out the text on your screens, it says, the cat's fossils are usually found in the concrete nests of long-limbed bipedal humans, suggesting that the killer cats wandered into their lairs before slaughtering their hapless victims. And by way of another example, I'm aware of a European museum that's currently in the process of building a brand new hall of fossil dinosaurs, where one of the displays will be stations where visitors can combine different reconstructions of a single species. So the head from one reconstruction, the torso from another, the tail from a third. And the wall text encourages visitors to come up with different combinations and emphasizes that all the results are equally valid based on the available evidence. So I did a kind of makeshift version of this here with a few different reconstructions of Iguanodon. But this is important, I think, because it represents a shift, however subtle, away from the traditional top-down power dynamics of the museum, in which lay people, many of them children, are expected to enter the museum and receive the authoritative knowledge of the museum passively and gratefully. Museums have been under fire in recent years for many things, including the colonial ideology embedded in their displays, perhaps in their very existence. And maybe this move away from sort of top-down authority is a response to recent public outcry. This is not to cast aspersions on the expertise of scientists or paleontologists who select, prepare, study, and interpret the fossils on views in natural history museums, or on their intentions. But it seems significant that natural history museums, which were once designed to enforce an authoritative view of the natural world, are increasingly honoring the intuitions of their visitor, highlighting scientific blind spots, and courting a sense of playfulness. And I would love to hear from the other panelists who either work in paleontology or have written more extensively about museum displays on this trend, or whether they think it's a trend at all during the discussion. But in the Last Dinosaur Book, Dr. Mitchell, he wonders aloud whether the dinosaur has been used up, whether it is, quote, a cultural image that has been fully consumed and is now ready for the junk heap. And he goes on to write that while that day may yet come, it's not here yet. That we, and I'm quoting again, still have things to learn from dinosaurs, and that they will go in and out of style, responding to the crises of the moment. And I think he couldn't be more right, and would suggest that dinosaurs are not only the totem animal of modernity, as he so persuasively argued in his book, but of a larger swerve towards relativism and recognitions of multiple, sometimes contradictory ways of knowing that we're increasingly seeing and embracing today. Dr. Mitchell identified the profound ambivalence and uncertainty surrounding the dinosaur in 1998. It seems as though the rest of the world is finally catching up to him. And that's it. And I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Zoe, for this presentation. So moving forward, our next guest speaker is Dr. Norman MacLeod. My introduction will inevitably fall short of Dr. MacLeod's many accomplishments. He's the author of hundreds of scientific publications on areas such as micropaleontology, quantitative analysis of organic form, extinction research. He's also the author of multiple books and collections of technical articles. Most importantly as well, he has spearheaded the development of online publication and networking in paleontology with the founding of Paleontologia Electronica, whose actual 25th anniversary was not too long ago, I believe, I think last year, and PaleoNet as well. And he's now teaching at Nanjing University after an extensive career at the Natural History Museum in London. So please welcome me. Please join me in welcoming Dr. MacLeod.
I have to unmute. Sorry about that. I have to come back here. No, am I muted? I shouldn't be muted. I'm not muted now.
You're not muted anymore.
Okay, great. Great, thank you. Share screen again. And where's my where's my, just a second. I need to get back to my presentation. Where to go? There it is. Okay. Now share the screen. And okay. Pictures and sound now.
The sound is here.
Okay.
The picture is here. Yeah, everything is here.
Pictures here. Pictures here. Yeah, it takes a while. It's kind of latent. Okay. Well, thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to speak at this symposium. Thank you for the people who have attended, and thank you, Tom, for writing the Last Dinosaur Book. I was probably one of the first paleontologists to purchase the Last Dinosaur Book. I was at a scientific meeting. I've forgotten where it was, but I saw it in the display at the University of Chicago book stall at the at the meeting, and it intrigued me because, of course, the picture was a movie famous. There's a movie that is very similar to the picture. This is a painting, of course. And I thought that it was probably a different type of dinosaur book, and I couldn't have been more right. I cast through it, I glanced through it, and saw immediately that that this was not a dinosaur book that like I'd ever picked up before. So I immediately bought it, took it home, and read it in just a few days. And my efforts, my suspicions were warmly rewarded. Unfortunately, while the book was very well received by many authors, here's just a smattering of the different reviews that still exist online. And as you can see, Tom was able to attract the reviewers from a number of very noteworthy magazines and journals. And many of these reviews had very nice things to say about the book. One need not share the author's views in order to enjoy this book. The man is amusing to argue against. Who could be disappointed with that sort of review? On the other hand, there were other reviews here from equally noteworthy publications, some of which took Tom to task for some of the comments that his book, and I was dismayed to learn that some of these reviews that were written for, once again, very well-known publications were authored by some of my paleontological colleagues. So here we have Niles Eldridge, who worked at the American Museum, still works at the American Museum, he's retired now, saying that thus we read through virtually the entire book, learning about the totemic properties of dinosaurs without really getting down to them. And then there's Peter Dodson over in Science, writing in Science magazine. Very odd for a book like this to be covered by Science magazine, but Peter, who is a dinosaur worker, suggests that Mitchell occasionally exhibits a disturbing tendency towards sloppiness. Now, I think both of these esteemed paleontologists were actually missing the point of the review and actually being a bit too precious about their subject. I think that from these comments and from other comments that I was party to at the time of the book's publication, then the paleontological community largely reacted negatively to the book as an example of territoriality more than anything else. Dinosaurs, after all, in most people's minds prior to Tom's work, dinosaurs are scientific objects. Dinosaurs are objects from the past that have yielded their secrets through the diligent work and diligent, time-consuming, and very detailed work of paleontologists. And paleontologists, as they do with many organisms, many fossil organisms, many organisms from the ancient past, have a tendency to feel proprietary about their topic. They sort of own dinosaurs, if you will. And here was somebody from a completely different field that nobody had really knew much about, iconography. And he's writing about dinosaurs. Now, there are mistakes in Tom's book, but that's a little bit disingenuous because most technical books that I pick up in paleontology have mistakes in them, sometimes very glaring mistakes in them. So taking Tom, who is writing outside of his field, the book, the Last Dinosaur Book, contains a wealth of information about the history of dinosaurs and the history of work on dinosaurs, information that is not part of the normal iconographic canon. So the fact that a few mistakes might have crept in certainly is nothing to get too upset about, even though many of my colleagues did get upset about that. But like I said, I think they're really missing the point of Tom's book. I'm not sure that the paleontological community at large has made peace with it, but Tom's book has become very influential in a variety of other areas, and I think that's just as important. The choice of dinosaurs was very propitious because he raises the question in the book, at least for me, as to which image of the dinosaur should we really pay the most attention to? Should we treat dinosaurs as historical objects, the way the paleontologists and scientists do? Or should we treat dinosaurs as cultural objects? Now, we have, up to the time of the book's publication, 1998, a large number of works had appeared, popular works had appeared on the subject of dinosaurs, and in many cases, these popular works touched on their role as cultural objects very, very briefly. but nobody had really taken that thistle, or taken that rose by the thorns, and really dove into the cultural aspects of dinosaurs and why dinosaurs are popular and how dinosaurs have been used in a cultural context. Tom was the first one to do that, and my suspicion is that he wasn't really just talking about dinosaurs in this book. He's talking about many, many things, talking about history, he's talking about economics, he's talking about culture, he's talking about education. But I suspect that in addition to that, he's talking about the distinction between science and humanities, science being represented by the scientific study of dinosaurs, and then humanities being represented by his book, by the way in which somebody from the humanities can take and run with the topic of dinosaurs in the context in which they're used to talking about cultural objects, and demonstrate not only to the general public, not only to lay people who are interested in dinosaurs, but also to the scientific community, that humanists have just as much to say about these so-called scientific phenomena as the scientists do. And the choice of dinosaurs was very propitious in that respect, and I'll come back to that. In choosing dinosaurs, I think Tom was not only attempting to redress the lack of balance obvious in the consideration of what had become a quintessentially a scientific subject, but also to showcase what could be done with this subject, what of importance could be done with this subject by someone who was from the other side of the fence, someone who is from the humanities side, and show that in order to understand dinosaurs, that we not only have to regard them as historical objects, but we have to regard dinosaurs as a concept. Previous speakers, I've noticed, and this is not a criticism, but just an observation, previous speakers have talked about dinosaurs, used the word dinosaur in order to talk about the animals themselves, the extinct animals, and also to talk about the concept that Tom was talking about. These are two different sides of the coin. They're different sides of the same coin, of course, but nevertheless, in order to understand dinosaurs and understand the effect that dinosaurs have on us as people, then we have to understand both. And this synergy, this reflective nature of the context in which we understand dinosaurs has had just as much effect on the scientific community as it has on the cultural community. Tom, in the Last Dinosaur Book, Tom points out that one of the areas that I study about dinosaurs and other organisms is their extinction. And the extinction theories that we have through the years for dinosaurs and for other organisms tend to mirror whatever is a contemporary concern in the culture at the present time. So we've had theories of dinosaur extinction that have had to do with migration, with competition, with dropping of bombs, the famous asteroid impact, which is currently one of the popular theories, is quite clearly a nuclear war scenario, which developed in the 1980s around the time of the Reagan administration. But the point I would like to make is that through Tom's book, I think the point that Tom was trying to make was that neither approach to the study of dinosaurs was superior to the other. That we could look at dinosaurs from the standpoint of them being historical objects, or we can look at dinosaur as a concept and use that to reciprocally illuminate each other's discipline and each other's understanding of dinosaurs as a whole. This creature, this concept, has an appendage rather firmly planted in both realms, both the humanities and the sciences, and couldn't be understood fully by either approach working in isolation. And that's a point that I think is often missed in the people that look at the Last Dinosaur Book. They think of it as a treatise on dinosaurs, and it is a treatise on dinosaurs. But it's also a reflection of the role in which humanities can illuminate the science, and how the science has, of course, illuminated the humanities. So to understand dinosaurs fully, they have to be understood both in their biological and their cultural context. Dinosaurs as historical objects, and dinosaur as a cultural object, or as a cultural concept, I should say. Now, Tom did an excellent job, I think, in showcasing really how dinosaurs have made their way into all of the different aspects of popular culture, into books, both fiction and popular science, popular and nonfiction books, of course. Videos here represented by television and movies, graphics, the objects to art, the toys, and also the sculptures, the dinosaur sculptures that increasingly you see for sale in those museum gift shops. And then there's the educational aspect where dinosaurs are walking into the classrooms these days and teaching people not only about dinosaurs, but about other subjects as well. So dinosaurs are fully integrated into the popular culture in ways that are hard to appreciate if you're not sensitive to the fact that dinosaurs are everywhere. And one of my favorite games to play when I'm out with people in shopping malls or just walking down the street is spot the dinosaur. Just about everywhere you go, if you look hard enough, you're going to see a dinosaur or see something that has to do with the dinosaur. They're everywhere, quite literally. Now, I think I'm not sure. Maybe Tom can tell us whether his selection of paleontology and selection of dinosaurs in particular was simply a fortuitous happenstance, or whether it was the result of careful consideration. But I can think of a very few other topics that would be as ripe for exploitation in this manner in terms of exemplifying the similarities and differences between science and the humanities, other than the dinosaur. Paleontology, for better or for ill, is seen as suspect by many of my fellow scientists. Like humanities, paleontology is not considered as an especially rigorous discipline. We tend to make up stories about the past and to couch our explanations of the past in terms of stories, in much the way that humanists use the narrative device in order to explain relationships among cultural objects. So many of my fellow physicists and chemists look at paleontology and sort of scratch their heads and say, "Are you sure you're really a science?" So paleontology was a very fortuitous selection there, to the extent that funding is a sign of scientific importance, and of course, astronomers can put telescopes into orbit around the Earth, and physicists can create world-destroying weapons. But paleontology is not only a cheap science. Pretty much we just look at bones and look at fossils in museums or in our offices. But it's also doesn't attract much funding. It's fairly unusual for a paleontologist to get a large grant, and that's a reflection, of course, of the fact that most funding bodies for science have other priorities than funding paleontology, irrespective of its popularity. There are no general theories of paleontology per se. In paleontology, we've been trying to promote the idea of macroevolution for over 100 years now. That comes up, but it's not really catching on. But nevertheless, that's about all we have to say about the general theories that are inherently paleontological, and even that isn't inherently paleontological now that the geneticists have hit on macroevolution. But we use theories from other disciplines, and that's another way that my scientific colleagues kind of cast aspersions on paleontology. And there's the tendency of many of my colleagues to couch their interpretations as associative narratives rather than the outcomes of experiments or statistical hypothesis tests. So if you're going to establish a beachhead in science, if a humanities person is going to establish a beachhead in science, you want to look for a good place to land. And I can't imagine, in retrospect, I couldn't imagine a better place for somebody who is interested in pushing the boundaries of science and humanities couldn't really recommend a better place to land than in paleontology, as it turned out. Now, as has already been mentioned by one of the previous speakers, one of the ideas that Tom has promoted is dinosaurs as the totem animal of modernity. Of course, totem doesn't have to be an animal. Many totems are chimeras or just concepts. But totems are sacred objects or symbols that are believed by a particular society to have spiritual significance and is adopted as an emblem. And Tom's book certainly demonstrates that dinosaurs have many, if not all, the aspects of a totem that came into existence for the first time in the modern era. Came into existence, I should say, recognized as something unique all by itself as a dinosaur in the modern era. Dinosaurs, of course, were picked up by ancient peoples. Actually, dinosaurs were picked up by ancient peoples. Fossils were picked up by ancient peoples too, but there was quite a bit of controversy about what those objects were. In any event, dinosaurs epitomize the modern time in the sense of being able to encompass many alternative roles, such as both innovation and obsolescence in the same concept, in the same animal, if you will, a conceptual animal. And dinosaurs function in a number of ritualistic contexts, especially the rituals with growing up. Most adolescents pass through a dinosaur stage, even though if Tom didn't, he's kind of exceptional, I think, in that respect, and of course in many other respects as well. But here's we've seen some of these pictures already. The dinosaurs, the fact that dinosaurs have been able to adapt, they've adapted both as a necessity for their cultural context, for the exploitation of their cultural context, but also they've adapted in terms of these images because scientific information has become better and better. These are all pictures of the same animal, iguanodon, and who we've already heard from. And the iguanodon, the spike at the see if I can put this, this spike was originally erroneously placed on the iguanodon's nose. If you look at some of those pictures that previous authors have shown, they have the spike on the iguanodon's nose. When we have better fossils, it's the spike here is on the Crystal Palace dinosaurs. That spike is on the iguanodon's nose here. But by the late 1800s, then it was found out that the spike actually belongs on the hand, on the thumb. It's actually a thumb spike, and as you can see, the anatomy of the dinosaur has undergone radical transformation, not necessarily because of its cultural context, but because we have better information about dinosaurs, and that has leaked into the cultural context. Dinosaurs now that were tail-dragging plodders are now very active animals that take care of their young and build nests. So a complete revolution in the aspect of dinosaurs, and of course a complete revolution in the way in which dinosaurs can be used as symbols to represent many cultural types of relationships. But I'd like to just pose a question for the purpose of this symposium: is the dinosaur the only totem of modernity, or are we seeing perhaps the development of another totem of modernity in terms of artificial intelligence and robots? Much like the dinosaur, the artificial intelligence goes back much further in history than people might imagine. Talos, 400 BC, was part of Greek mythology, an artificial man that was built to protect one of the Greek islands. The golem, the Jewish golem, of course, an artificial man that used to protect the Jewish community. By the time we get, none of these were considered to be artificial intelligence, but by the time we get to Frankenstein, which was written about the same time as dinosaurs were being discovered, we get an artificial human, an artificial thinking machine, not just something that obeys commands, but has thoughts and a life of itself. Proceeding up through the HAL 9000 of 2001: A Space Odyssey, the replicants of Blade Runner, the Terminator, this idea of artificial intelligence has changed its forms in much the same way that dinosaurs have, and now we're getting deep fakes, and now on to ChatGPT. I'm not sure, this is a topic for discussion, I'm not sure that artificial intelligence has achieved a fully totemic aspect in popular culture yet, but I do see lots of signs, lots of similarities between the way in which artificial intelligence is spoken of in a cultural context and the way in which dinosaurs are spoken of in a cultural context. So I'll be interested to see what Tom has to say about that. And the similarities are quite striking. Artificial intelligence came into existence for the first time in the modern era with Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It epitomizes the modern sense of time in the sense that it's used. Artificial intelligence is used to argue that we're entering a utopia, and through the means of artificial intelligence, we're on the cusp of entering into a dystopia as well, innovation and obsolescence. And then increasingly, artificial intelligence is functioning in a number of different contexts. Whether they're ritualistic contexts or not, there's something that we might want to discuss. So anyway, I would simply like to close by thanking Tom for writing this very, very interesting book that hasn't received, I don't think it's received enough attention in the scientific community as it needs to, but also I think it's a book that points the way toward how humanities and scientists and science might go forward together to the mutual advantage of both. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this presentation, and we are now going to move to our fourth and last speaker for the panel, Will Tattersdill. Will is a senior lecturer in literature and contemporary fantasy cultures at the University of Glasgow. His work focuses on the relationship between literature and science, and especially from the period around 1850 to the present day. On matters of dinosaurs, Will has published multiple articles, and amongst one of them, an article on Russell and Siggin's Dinosaurid, which is also actually discussed in the Last Dinosaur Book. So please join me in welcoming Will Tattersdill for this last presentation.
Thank you very much, Victor. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you for having me. I'm cognizant that I'm on a very distinguished panel. It's an honor to be asked. I actually don't have slides. I normally do put slides together. I suppose I'm subconsciously rebelling against the image text of the dinosaur. So I'm just going to read like the literary critic I am. I'm a relative newcomer. I first read this book about 10 years ago when I was coming to a project on dinosaurs from a PhD thesis that I'd written about late Victorian science fiction. In that work, I've been talking about the relationship between C.P. Snow's two cultures. One of the great things about going last, by the way, is you get to just say, as if for the first time, everything that everyone else has already said on the panel. C.P. Snow's two cultures, with an interest specifically in how the literature science schism operated and operates in the realm of popular culture, of the public sphere, of trash. So this is what I was thinking about. And dinosaurs had long struck me as the perfect case study by which to advance this discussion into a wider temporal span. I had a conversation with the great Ralph O'Connor, known to many here, I'm sure, at the University of Aberdeen. And it was Ralph who put me in the way of the Last Dinosaur Book, the work in which the dinosaur as cultural artifact had been most comprehensively approached. Something which I took for granted on my first reading was the book's appendix on the science culture division, which begins, as many such sections do, with an acknowledgement of C.P. Snow's literally divisive Reed lecture, and moves on, as many such sections do, to a discussion of what has since been called the so-called affair, moments in which the academic communities of science and the arts came into explosive contact with one another. At the time, I was reading very few books which didn't mention all of this, so it didn't strike me as particularly revolutionary that Mitchell was seeing dinosaurs as an opportunity for cross-disciplinary thinking, a rejection, as he puts it, of, quote, common sense contrasts between science and imagination, speculation, or fantasy, end quote. With hindsight, though, for me, this is probably the Last Dinosaur Book's most foundational contribution. The argument that comprehending the whole of what the dinosaur is requires a study which does not limit itself purely to scientific knowledge of fossils, of osteology, of comparative anatomy, of science, Whilst we recognize that the Last Dinosaur Book was not the first academic work to this party, thinking perhaps of Martin Rudwick's work on the history of geology or Bruno Latour's early essay on the Three Little Dinosaurs of 1980, it remains 25 years later, perhaps still, I think, the most ambitious attempt to reach around the width of what the dinosaur is, from bedspreads to paintings to rocks to films to diagrams of bone beds. Something that remains provocative about this book, I think, is its own disciplinary situation. We're told early on that the project is essentially an anthropological one, in the vein that would later be followed by people like Brian Noble articulating dinosaurs. But it's also, Mitchell says, a psychological work and an historical one. These are the two perspectives with which he frames, respectively, the why and the when of dinosaurs. As the book goes on, other disciplines are drawn into the frame: art history, or the history of the image in particular, of course, film theory, to an extent, much besides. But the more I read and reread, the more I was struck by an absence among the many disciplines this book summons to its service, the absence of my own discipline, literary criticism. This is all the more surprising, given that Mitchell is described as being in a department of English literature on the book's dust jacket, at least partly, the Department of English Language and Literature and the Department of Art History, is how it goes. As I began framing my own research questions about dinosaurs from a literary critical perspective, I noticed that most of the rest of the extremely small community researching the popular dinosaur kept faith with this aspect of the Last Dinosaur Book. Recent scholarly works on these questions, with the exception, I think, of Borea Sax's book on Dinomania of 2018, have tended to be by historians. I'm thinking here of Alien Islands, American Dinosaur Abroad, Paul Brinkman's second Jurassic Dinosaur Rush, for instance, or by people active in science or SciComm more directly, Riley Black's My Beloved Brontosaurus, or Steve Brusat's The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs. At Popularizing Paleontology, the wonderful scholarly network through the affordances of which we are gathered today, the only routine representatives of literary criticism in particular have been, I think, myself and my former PhD student, Richard Fallon, who is here. Hello, Richard. Now, this is not a complaint, it's an opportunity. My opportunity today is to tell you how I think the Last Dinosaur Book matters to literary criticism in general, and to a literary critic interested in interrogating disciplinary boundaries in particular. And the main reason it's a pleasure to have this opportunity is that the odds are fairly slim that anyone from my own discipline is here to contradict me about my mischaracterizations of it. Don't get me wrong, the Last Dinosaur Book doesn't ignore dinosaurs in print. Despite its focus on a dinosaur as an image, it makes plenty of space for the textual dinosaur, with chapters on, for instance, Shan Thurber's Last Thunderhorse West of the Mississippi, on Calvino's The Dinosaurs, wonderful short story on Harry Harrison's West of Eden, which, if the Last Dinosaur Book hasn't made you delve into Harry Harrison, then please do. It's wonderful. To say nothing, of course, of the novel of Jurassic Park. And I'm not saying that it's the responsibility of literary critics, or of anyone really, to focus only on print. Any adherent to the arguments made in the Last Dinosaur Book must admit that such myopia will never get anything done. And my own work on this question has taken me, a trained literary critic, to places as distinct as pre-Raphaelite art, the silent film era, the Star Trek universe, and contemporary museum studies, often to my considerable discomfort. Despite how that sentence was phrased, I'm a lifelong Trekkie and always will be. I'm not sorry. It remains my position, though, that the value in making these journeys, the journeys which dinosaurs almost require us to make if we are to understand them and through them ourselves, includes the value from my own training, which I can take into those areas with me. And without the time commitment necessary to work up to PhD level in vertebrate paleontology, any responsible activity I propose to make in this area has to proceed from the assumption that there is something useful about the vantage point offered by literary criticism in particular. This, I think, is similar to what Mitchell is reaching towards when he writes that, quote, "The Last Dinosaur Book will have to be written by an outsider to both dinosaur science and dinomania," end quote, although I share his immediate doubt that such a distant commentator truly exists. What is the something distinctive that English literature, a discipline long accustomed to apologizing for itself, brings to the social dinosaur? I, of course, have several answers to this question, but I will bother you with just two of them for now. The first is that literary critics are habituated to the protean qualities of text, what Derek Attridge has called literature's singularity, inheres in its refusal to be condemned or condensed into any one meaning. Every literary text, even outright state propaganda, carries within itself the possibility to be read differently. Each reader makes the text for themselves afresh. Each reading produces a distinctive constellation of meanings, and the idea of collapsing into final correctness, a point where all possible questions are answered to everyone's satisfaction, is ludicrous. So sometimes at a family dinner, I'm asked, hasn't everything possible been said about Shakespeare by this point? No, it can't be. That's the point of the discipline. That's what we're doing here. Now, a lot of outsiders mistake this understanding for a sense that anything goes. They are surprised to learn that there are still things that are wrong in my discipline, that there are still facts which must be attended to, that history still matters, and that you can't simply make up the explanations that you like. The sharpest literary critics are the ones who can attend to the multivalency of the text, whilst also being responsible to the constellation of historical and cultural meanings alongside which that text operates, while simultaneously being true to their own subjectivity, judgment, and insight. I hope I don't need to say too much about why I think dinosaurs encourage this kind of approach, since they are, as Mitchell says, both made out of irreducible scientific truth and mobile imaginative concepts, and thanks to the paucity of the fossil record, always will be. Dinosaurs then function similarly to literary texts, regardless of whether or not we encounter them in literature, film, or the museum. They are many-meaninged things whose slipperiness is both a challenge and an advantage. Literary critics are used to dealing with this. The second thing I want to submit for your consideration is that LitCrit is getting better and better at thinking about genre, and that the analogy between textual genres and taxonomic processes is one which is well worth paying attention to, as the Last Dinosaur Book itself points out on page 52. By making an attempt to understand the work done by a dinosaur in a text, whatever that text is, we can see more of the explicit and implicit labor that these creatures are doing across the breadth of culture. In other words, to psychology's why and history's when, as proposed by Mitchell, I think literary criticism can usefully start adding a how. What is it about the way genre, form, and material conspire in the body and the corpus of the social dinosaur which makes that creature so successful? That attentiveness to form is at the front, I think, of the ways in which I approach this subject, and the bedrock of that thinking all lies in the pages of Mitchell's useful book. I'll end, if I may, with a brief mention of Where I Part Company from Mitchell. My aim, he writes in the appendix on science and culture, which I mentioned at the start, has not been to heal the division between science and popular culture. I suppose I'm jealous of this because mine has, and the task is not an easy one. It's not going particularly brilliantly, but I do see this kind of work as having the potential to be restorative, or at least I want to. In this appendix, I think we see the Last Dinosaur Book's own historical situation at the very end of the period of the so-called science wars, even if we also see elsewhere in profound evidence of the author's collaborative approach to scientists and to the sciences. The scars of two-culture thinking are still right across scholarship, and healing work needs to be the long-term project of the entire academy. It remains the case that many aren't interested. But through Pop Paleo and other networks, I've relished the opportunity to speak with scientists and other disciplinary experts, many of whom are here, in a more convivial atmosphere. My conviction is that multidisciplinary, not interdisciplinarity, is the way forward here, and that the dyadic divisions in today's scholarship are easier to heal with conversation than they are with position papers. Mitchell positions the dinosaur as an entity which can cross the science-culture divide, acting as a go-between to increase disciplinary contact. 25 years later, I think it's now possible to imagine the dinosaur not as something that travels between the two cultures, but as something that gives the lie to the entire conceit, the creature which cannot exist, not at all, without both hard science and harder imagination. I'll finish by evoking King James Gurney's Dinotopia of 1992, which proposes the dinosaur as a figure of and mechanism for cultural inclusivity against a history of assumed monstrousness and violence stretching back beyond King Kong and forward to Jurassic World Dominion. Gurney makes a radical proposal in the motto of his imagined country: breathe deep, seek peace. That's what the dinosaurs teach us. I'll be optimistic and say that peace feels more possible today than it seems to have in 1998, perhaps in part because work which crosses old ingrained boundaries is increasingly less controversial. In contributing to that tone and in establishing the central usefulness of the dinosaur in making these crossings, the Last Dinosaur Book remains an absolutely keystone text. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Will, for this beautiful presentation and great way to end the panel. So we have officially just 10 minutes left, but since we started a little bit late, I'll cheat and say we have 15 minutes. I would like to obviously give Professor Mitchell some time to respond, give comments, and interact with our panelists. And I will, if we have a few minutes left, I hope to give some time also to people in the audience who would like to ask questions. So please join me in welcoming Professor Tom Mitchell.
Thank you. And I have to say, I'm really overwhelmed with the richness and variety of these responses. There's so much to talk about here that I hardly know where to begin, but I'm going to really just take up what Will's last point was, which coming into this, I'll tell you what I thought I would want to talk about. And that's, this interval of 25 years, 1998, this book was published. Now we're 25 years later. What is, it was a product of its moment. And as Will, I think, rightly says, the moment of the science wars was haunting it, and C.P. Snow and the two cultures. And yet the book, I wrote it, this was a gift from the gods. I never thought I would write a book like this. It just spilled out. It started as a review of Jurassic Park for London Review of Books, and it got out of control. And I actually did the writing in about 6 months. I've never had any a thing like that, where something just pours out of you. So if I've ever been inspired in my life, this was the book that felt more like just a gift from the gods than a labor. And it wasn't a labor of love, because as I said, I didn't love dinosaurs. I thought it was weird. In fact, I tell the anecdote of being a first grader who's told, draw pictures of dinosaurs. So I drew pictures with cowboys. And I was instructed by my teacher, no, that's wrong. There were no cowboys around when the dinosaurs existed. So your picture is incorrect. And needless to say, when Jonathan Bordeaux up there in Canada used this as a poster when I gave a guest lecture at Trent University, I said, that's my cover. It's so among the things that happened while I was researching it, there were gifts pouring into me from every side. Everybody I talked about said, oh yeah, I have something for you. Talk about potlatch. I feel like this book was just given to me by lots of friends, interlocutors. I want to mention just a couple, and one who's here, Sam Baker. Are you still here? Sam was my research assistant. And there came a moment when I said, this book cannot be finished without taking account of that first grade experience about children and children's literature and the instruction of children. There's a psychological aspect to this. I had been, of course, Freud talks about the object relations and the early relation of children, how they learn through things like cuddly toys, and how at a certain point the dinosaur shows up in especially American children's bedrooms. the great Mark Dion made a paleo art installation out of that by showing everything that could come into a bedroom. So Sam Baker, I said, I want to know what goes on in first grade classrooms. And Sam said, I'm on it. He was a graduate student at the time. And a few months later, he comes back in with a box, a big box filled with folders. And he says, I wrote to the national, the Secretary of Education and said, is there any tracking of first grade lesson plans? And they said, yeah, we gather them from all over the country. So suddenly the kids section, the last section of the book, was writing itself, because I read these lesson plans and I realized some teachers think this is your introduction to science. Some think it's your introduction to fantasy. From the beginning, the two culture interaction is occurring. And I think the wise teacher allows the play to occur. So that brings me to some of the other things that have been said here. What is the difference between our time and the mid-90s when this book was pouring out of my laptop? I speculated back then that maybe the dinosaur would exhaust itself and be replaced by something else. And Norman has raised that question. Is there something new on the horizon? The figures of artificial intelligence, that is the history of the robot. I think it's related, but I don't think AI has a totemic character. I think it, though, is related to what's the opposite of the totem. The opposite of the totem is the dangerous alien image, the image that might lead to the disappearance of the people of the totem. That is, every time you have a totem, you also have to have a foreigner. You have to have an enemy, a non-member of the tribe. Well, the aliens have landed, my friends. They are the new updated robots that can have a conversation with you, an intelligent conversation driven by large language models. That is, they know everything that we have thought and said, and they've memorized it. And they use probability to engage in very plausible conversations with us, in which people have already started having artificial intelligences fall in love with them. To me, the great totemic moment is the film Her, in which the voice of Scarlett Johansson as the girlfriend becomes the companion, but then a companion who is uncontrollable. Also Ex Machina and other contemporary robot films. In a way, I've tried to predict that in the Last Dinosaur Book by talking about, remember, it's framed from an alien perspective. It isn't just that I said, I'm not a dinosaur expert, I'm not a scientist. It's also that I wanted to say, I want to look at this as if I weren't even a human being. Suppose, and that's why I started it, by treating it as the scientific report of an alien species that lands after the human species, and all trace of us has vanished except for our fossil remains. And as they go through it, I mean, you'll recall that it opens with the report of a alien on a starship. The Salamander starship, captain's log, stardate 3324, have discovered relics of vanished civilization on Terra, third planet in the solar system, loss. Preliminary survey indicates typical phase 3 evolutionary failure, advanced technologies, rudimentary eco-sociopolitical arrangements leading to irreversible environmental degradation and premature extinction of higher vertebrate life forms. Terra, now a desert planet with toxic atmosphere populated by microorganisms. Only notable anomaly, traces of primitive salamandrian life forms found among the ruins of late Terran civilization. Recommend dispatch of interdisciplinary archaeological team to investigate. So really the outer frame of this book is it's a sci-fi novel, and a lighthearted one. I open with a seminar of erect reptiles looking at the trace of Homo sapiens and saying, ridiculous. What do they mean? Do we become totems for them, for the future aliens? Will artificial intelligence look back on us as when they've taken over and replaced us, which, remember, the contemporary narrative is AI will replace us. It will render us extinct. Extinction narratives are rampant in relation to AI. So it's a different time. Let me remind you of what the 90s were like. It's the period when, and I made myself a note here to remember it all. The 90s were what I would call a cold period in history. Remember, it's the Clinton era. Our time is hot. Global warming is only the kind of physical manifestation of it. It's an epoch in which planetary danger is on the horizon very clearly. 2023 is the hottest year in human history. But it's accompanied by very disturbing global phenomena. The rise of Christian nationalism in the United States. At this moment, the Speaker of the House of Representatives is one of the co-sponsors of a museum in Kentucky where Noah's Ark has been reconstructed. So, and this is now, this is the Speaker of the House we're talking about. This is not some, back in the 90s, this would have been laughed off. It's not funny when Christian nationalism is portraying the true history of the earth through a Noah's Ark filled with styrofoam dinosaurs. So they have an answer to the question, why did the dinosaurs die? Well, Noah made 2 arks, one of them sank. I talk about that. And I felt like in the 90s, that was a joke. Now it's really there. Another thing to remember about the 90s, the general prosperity of the Clinton era. The Berlin Wall had fallen to kind of inaugurate the 90s. The democracy movement in Beijing had risen, and China was opening itself. Apartheid ended in South Africa. The Oslo Accords were signed by the PLO and Israel, and it looked like a 2-state solution was on the horizon. When you look at that, you realize I wrote this in a cold period when it was we could have fun. Now it feels much more urgent to me. I feel like we're in a very dangerous time. So that's my historical sense of it. I had lots of things I wanted to say about each of your responses. Alison, when you said, one of the reviewers said the book was perhaps a hoax. No perhaps about it. It was a hoax. It was a sci-fi novel pretending to be something else and, basically becoming something else. It was such fun to be playful with it. I love what's your stories about the tar pits. I go to the tar pits all the time. Of course, carefully explain to my grandson, who's now 10 years old, there were no dinosaurs here. To reassure him that I know what the hell I'm talking about. Zoe, your focus on paleoart, much more extensive than mine. I was scratching a surface, which you have dug into, I think, much more deeply, many more artists. A question I wanted to throw back to you was, you may have noticed my paleoart chapter does not deal with dinosaur illustration so much, but with this thing that happened in the 80s and 90s, it grew out of Robert Smithson's intervention in the art world. And the question I wanted to answer was, how did the dinosaurs cross the park, Central Park, of course, I mean, and go from the Great Museum of Natural History into the Museum of Modern Art? And the answer is, in part, Robert Smithson, who was not a dinosaur illustrator, except for, a very early moment. He was something else. And that's what I thought of as the moment when paleo art entered the art world, when it became something that Art Forum would pay attention to. So Mark Dion and David Brooks, more recently, Alan McCollum, other artists who I talk about, they're not exactly illustrators. They're trying to do something different. So if we have time for a little exchange on that, I'd like to hear your sense of that moment when paleo art crosses the park.
Sure. I mean, I think we use that term a little differently, just in the sense that, the works I was focused on were images created in a scientific context. They were based on fossil evidence versus artists who are using dinosaurs as subject matter in their practice. But of course, I also write about contemporary art. And in answer to your question, I think that crossing actually began a little earlier than Robert Smithson. Magritte has a painting called The Shadow of the Earth, L'Homme Terrestre. It's from 1928, I think. And that's a painting of a dinosaur. And Graham Sutherland painted dinosaurs in the 60s. And I think that some of this imagery was entering into sort of fine art contexts earlier. I think it would be interesting to do a study of those moments when that happens, because you're completely right that it is the exception. And like half the time, if you paint a dinosaur, you're going to be seen as irredeemably juvenile and stuck in some weird endless adolescence, or it'll be branded as kitsch. So how and why did these particular artists use that iconography and succeed with it? I think bears a lot of scrutiny. But I'm happy to send links to some examples.
Yeah, I've clearly got to get your book.
Yeah, it's about scientific images mostly, but you'll see there's some nods to fine art and pop culture in there.
And then Norman, I'm so happy Norman that agreed to be on this panel, because I think he plays an essential role in my sense of confidence about the book, because it was getting a lot of headwinds and flack. In 1998, when it was released, a thing called the Dinosaur List, which was one of these online things. It did to the dinosaur book what social media does to anything, any bad object. I mean, people were accusing me of, it wasn't just a hoax. I was some kind of terrorist.
Yes.
Yeah, and suddenly this kind of mild, knowledgeable, authoritative voice appears on the dinosaur list. N. MacLeod weighs in and says, now slow down, everybody. This book has some interesting things in it. Maybe it has a few mistakes and so forth. But it was the beginning of a beautiful friendship, which dates exactly from over this 25-year period. Norman was the one scientist who stood up for me. And so I'm eternally grateful for that. I think also one of the reasons he's not a dinosaur paleontologist. I hope I'm not revealing any secrets here, Norman, but he's a micro paleontologist. And we once had a conversation about what the difference is. He was being modest about, he says, paleontology is kind of a soft science. It tells stories. It doesn't do experiments. Doesn't have so much relation to computation as the other sciences. Actually, Norman is much closer. I think of him as one of the really hard scientists of paleontology, because he's a micropaleontologist. The fossil record is much more complete. So you can get the big story of the evolution of life on our planet, with an unbroken record. The dinosaurs are a very spotty and a bad creature for making generalizations about evolution from. The fossil record is too fragmentary. And that's partly because it's so fragmentary that we can make up all kinds of shit about them. They leave open lots of room for fantasy. So Norman works with huge databases. He works with small animals, crustaceans, clamshells, and notices tiny micro transformations that can now be dated very precisely. So Norman, I think of as a scientific paleontologist. He's hardcore. He's not messing around, and he's not. The other figure we haven't talked about here, which I think is one of the literary figures, to come back to Will's intervention, is the paleontologist hero, the paleontologist cowboy. The Roy Chapman Andrews, the big game hunter, the figure of the virile dino man, which is made fun of a bit in Jurassic Park in Sam Neill's portrayal of the paleontologist. But this is part of the story, part of the human story of the dinosaur is the figure of the heroic frontiersman who is out there digging these dangerous things up and bringing back buried treasure. So that figure, in fact, one of my colleagues I must mention here at University of Chicago is Paul Sereno, who is a very serious dinosaur scientist who's made many great discoveries. But one of the things I did while I was researching, and I said, Paul, I've seen you in the papers. Do you realize you are the virile dino boy of the moment? And he said, yeah, I know, it's really annoying. And he showed me a box. He said, you want to see my fan mail? So I absolutely. So I had my box of lesson plans for first graders and my box of fan letters to Paul Sereno. I mean, some of them were marriage proposals. He's very good looking, so that didn't hurt. So the whole idea of the cult object began to feel like it's just more and more inevitable, especially when you've got a macho hero to go with it. So, I mean, I would like to I hope that we still have some more time, because I would like to hear, I see many friends and also people I've heard of, but have never met here in the audience. Lots of comments and questions from all the rest of you. Not sure. I hope that at least covers some of what we've talked about. But I just want to thank all of the panelists for their generosity, and I can't tell you how moving it is to have my quarter-century-old book treated with this kind of affection and respect.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'll be happy to host the event, obviously, for a few minutes longer, so that people have time to ask questions or react. So feel free to raise a hand. I'll try to give you some time to speak if you want. If we have any answers, for example, from the panelists or remarks, anyone from the audience, please feel free to raise a hand. We could still host the event for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, please raise your hand, guys. Don't be shy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have Justin. Please go ahead.
Well, I don't have a question, but since I'm here, I just want to take the opportunity to also tell Dr. Mitchell that, like, your book, which I first read as an undergrad, and I'm a doctoral student now about to finish my thesis, which was inspired by your book. So it's been tremendously influential for me. So just wanted to thank you for that. In particular, it was it's the 2 chapters in the middle of the book about Thomas Jefferson. So because I read those, actually, I taught a class on dinosaurs and culture. It was the first class I ever taught as a professor that I got to pitch. And it was, I used your book as a text. And so then going back through it, I read those 2 chapters, and it kind of floored me for the first time when I was really like, what is the story here behind Jefferson and paleontology? and that's become the basis of my doctoral work now. So I just wanted to thank you for that. So
Great. Well, thank you for the comment. Yeah, for those of you who've read it, you know Jefferson had a bone room in the White House, and it was when I discovered that I thought, wow, this is like another gift. It just it kept on coming. Episodes of that sort, that things it had never occurred to me, like those lesson plans, like the history of the American obsession with big bones and the mammoth president, Barnum, and that whole line of thinking. So thank you.
Well, if there aren't any other question, I can only, thank everyone for being present for this event, for this celebration of the 25th anniversary of the Last Dinosaur Book, a book that counts to so many of us, and many more people who aren't here with us today. But thank you to our 4 panelists. Thank you so much to Professor Mitchell for having joined us. Thank you again for Pop Paleo for hosting this event. And well, I hope that we can meet for some more fun around dinosaurs and discussions like this one and celebration like this one. Thank you again very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.